Hi, welcome back to Channel 6 TV Community Focus. I'm Kenny Fogle. Glad you could be with us tonight because as not only we're educational, but we're entertaining as well. Tonight we're a little bit of both. We've got with us a very prolific author that happens to just live in the Barstown area, and I got a chance to meet him and talk to him a few weeks ago. And to be honest with you, I was fascinated, and I think if something fascinates me, that takes a lot of doing. I thought you might want to be sharing a little bit of what he's doing too. Mr. Ron Elliott. Ron, first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me here.
And I've heard of Ron Elliott for several years. I'll be honest with you. I've heard several people say one of the better authors you've got around here. And it takes me time to get around to books, but sometimes when I do and read them and I'm fascinated and meeting the author, it makes a big difference. You've been in this author business for a while.
Almost 20 years as a professional writer.
Now, being a professional writer is a little bit different than obviously what most people think. You've got a lot of, it's not as easy as it looks.
No, it is not. If you're writing fiction, I guess you can just sit down and write it.
Right.
But even at that, once you make up a fact, even though you made it up, it becomes a fact and you have to be consistent with it after that. The sort of stuff I do takes a great amount of research. And so then once that's done, the writing is the easy part because I already have all the facts and all I have to do is weave a story around.
Well, you said about research. I know that's hard work because that's tedious. It's hard work, and you have to be right about it. But one thing you just stuck in my head, you just told me, is you've got to paint the picture that's in your head and put it in somebody else's head.
Sure.
When they read your book, they've got to visualize what you're saying.
Well, yeah, and that's a very difficult thing to do. In the thousands of sentences I've written, there's only one that I'm absolutely sure put the picture that was in my mind in the reader's mind.
So again, being an author is something that, what made you want to do this?
I read, I'll do it very quickly. Basil Duke, who was John Hunt Morgan's right-hand man, wrote The History of Morgan's Cavalry in 1885. And to make a long story short, in that book, he was describing an incident that happened in Greenville, Tennessee in 1863. And he said, consensus of historians is whatever. He said, I don't agree with that. I was there. I saw it happen. I've had 20 years to think about it now. And I still think whatever Basil Duke thought. And I sat back from that, Kenny, and I said, the power of the written word is amazing. 140 years later, Basil Duke just told me what he was thinking. It blows me away to know that as long as the Commonwealth of Kentucky exists, my books will be on the shelf.
Well, speaking of books, let's go to some of the books here right now. And I know one thing you and I have talked about, when you do a book, you basically have to become somewhat the utmost authority on that book, or else you have no business writing that book.
On that particular topic, yes, indeed. If you don't bother to get the facts right, then in my opinion, you ought not to write it.
Well, the first book you wrote, what was that all about?
First book I wrote was Assassination at the State House. William Goebel, back in 1900, thought he ought to be governor of Kentucky. He was pulling some very dirty tricks until finally one day someone shot him in front of the old state capitol. Turns out that my dad's uncle, who was one of the many people that was accused of shooting William Goebel, and through that connection, I just stumbled into the story, actually.
So, and I know we'll get into a little bit of that story in a few minutes, but the Goebbels assassination obviously still not solved to this day. And I think you have a general idea who did it, but that's another story. We'll get into that.
Okay.
I know I talked to several people the other day about the supper club, the Beverly Hills Supper Club, and I don't know how many people I've talked to in just the last week that's either there, going there, had parents there, friends there, or just happened to be driving by.
And what you know about it is about 1/100th of the number of those stories that I've heard. A young man who was there, worked there, had been there for 20 years, was in there the night of the fire, contacted the publisher wanting to publish his story. And so the publisher asked me to write it for him. And so I wrote Inside the Beverly Hills Supper Club Fire in the first person, in the genre of Wayne Damrett, who was in there that night. And between the two of us, we interviewed many, many, many survivors of it. And that's a major portion of that book.
Now that happened back in what, 1970?
1978, May the 28th.
May 20th, 1978. It was a nightclub that had a lot of, even today, the fire, anybody going through fire school has to study that.
I'm happy to tell you that this book is required reading in a lot of fire department training classes.
Well, one of the things that you did, you made a good point a few minutes ago about painting a picture, and you painted a picture in my head about that. And to be honest with you, I don't remember a whole lot about it because it was back in the 70s, and I was busy doing some other things. But you mentioned a woman that was in the crowd, and they couldn't get her out.
Yeah.
And you told me the story, and it's been bothering me ever since.
Let me spout out the one sentence I was talking about, which was in this book. I asked Wayne Dammert, what color was the smoke? And he said it was black. And I said, what was it doing in there? And he said, nothing, just hanging there. Okay, so I wrote, the thick black smoke hung inside the building, stagnant, as solid as if that building were packed with wet black sand. I got that one right. Yeah, but it's a real horror story.
It is, and like I said, some of the stories that you tell in there, I don't care how tough a man you think you are, it's going to bring a tear to your eye because it's a tough story to deal with.
Let's move on to this one then.
Okay.
This young man, his name was Franklin Sousley, is one of the figures in that Iwo Jima flag raising picture. He was born in 1925. His father died in 1934. So he grew up, him and his mother, through the Depression in a single-parent household. They were tight. Franklin was killed on Iwo Jima about a month after the famous picture was taken, and I knew that going in. So when I had to write a story to kill him off, that wasn't too terribly difficult. But then, my goodness, I had to go tell his mother about it. And every person I've ever talked to, and I don't care how tough you are, everybody I've ever talked to says, and I cried when I read that. Hey, I had to write it.
Yeah. Well, the Iwo Jima, as that flag, I think I mentioned, we've talked about, is probably one of the most covered picture that's ever been taken in the history of mankind. As people have, just about everybody seen that picture.
Yeah, it is documented, I do believe, to be the most reproduced photograph in the world ever.
And and the young man you mentioned from near Flemingsburg, Kentucky, was one of the people in that picture.
Certainly was.
And
I have definitive proof. There's a lot of controversy still to this very day about who actually is in that picture, but I have definitive proof that Franklin did it.
So what is that book going to tell you? Is it going to tell you more of the story of patriotism, or is it going to tell you the story of one man struggle to survive and how he ended up later on Iwo Jima?
All the above. My publisher said to me when I told him I was going to do that, he said, how are you going to write a biography of somebody that only lived to be 19? And so the subtitle of my book is The Life and Legacy of a Iwo Jima flag raiser. So the book talks about his childhood and some incidents from that, which are very amusing.
Yeah.
How he got there to the top of that mountain. But then a lot of stuff happened after that, some of which is coincidental to the life of Franklin Sousley. But to make a long story short, as long as that statue, and people think it's the Iwo Jima statue, but it is the Marine Corps Memorial statue, outside Arlington Cemetery, Franklin Sousley lives on.
That's what I'm going to say. That book, and the book makes a difference. Again, his story could have been one that just sort of faded away into history.
Exactly.
But there it is.
And that brings us full circle to why I write books. Franklin needed that book written about him. And his aunt, who helped me with it a great deal, this 98-year-old woman threw her arms around me, and there's a tear trickling down her cheek, and she said, I don't know how to thank you for writing that book. That's pretty good reward for writing.
Exactly right. Well, as I've heard you say, you said doesn't really matter who was holding onto the flag that day. It does to them.
Yes, it does.
Well, and this book here I'm not familiar with. The El Dorado book is the one that I'm familiar with the other three fairly well. So let you explain a little bit about what the American El Dorado is.
There was a young man from Hardin County. He was from Elizabethtown. Went to California in the early 1840s. He was there when the gold rush happened, and he made some money. And more importantly, he got to know some money people. So he showed up one night in San Francisco in the summer of 1870, and he said he'd found a place over there in Arizona or New Mexico, over in there somewhere.
Yeah.
There's diamonds just laying on the ground. All you got to do is just pick them up. Well, they laughed, of course. He said, well, who knew there was gold in California?
Yeah.
Who knew there was silver in Nevada? The vast majority of the American West was unexplored. Who is to say that there aren't diamonds laying on the ground? And ain't I got a sack full of them here to prove it? Well, of course, it was a scam.
Yeah.
But he involved some very, very important people. came back to Elizabethtown in the summer of 1872 with about $500,000 of scam money in his pocket, bought about half of Hardin County, and then when the lawsuit started, that's when it really got interesting.
So basically, he was the Bernie Madoff of his day.
My little blurb on it says long before Bernie Madoff and long before Ponzi became associated with the word scheme, there was Philip Arnold.
Well, one more book I want to talk about you don't have with you here that obviously is near and dear to a lot of people, because I don't remember, a little bit before my time, and I've heard the stories over and over, was the 1951 point shaving scandal at the University of Kentucky. Now, I know that was probably one of the tougher books you had to write because you couldn't get a lot of cooperation.
But it was fun. I'm a UK fan. And the genesis of that is 20 years ago, I read in the Lexington paper that C.M. Newton, who was the athletics director, had asked Ralph Beard to come to UK to talk to Rick Pitino's basketball team. Mm-hmm. And I presumed that what he was going to say was, boys, don't screw up your life like I did.
Yeah.
So I called him and I said, Mr. Beard, if you'd like to tell the world that story, I'm the guy to write it. Nope, can't do it. Flatly refused. And so I just kind of forgot about it. But then 2 years ago, I discovered that Ralph Beard left about 18 hours worth of oral interviews at the University of Kentucky hidden away in the special archives. Mm-hmm. So Ralph did tell me about it after all. And by now, my research skills and resources are such that I found out a lot of stuff. Even though nobody would talk to it, I didn't get any first-hand information mm-hmm. other than what I got from Ralph Beard. But I found there's a lot of things that are not to be found out about that point shaving scandal, but what there is to know, I got it.
And your books are available where? If somebody want to buy one of Ron Elliott's books right now, I know they're Amazon, probably.
They are on Amazon. You can go to my website, which is ronsbks.com, or they're in Barnes & Noble. Any reputable bookstore will have them.
Okay, well, before we get out of here, I know there's a lot of people out there that may be budding authors of some sort. Is there any advice you give to others that have a tremendous imagination, have the tenacity to do a lot of research? What is it that would make a good new author?
Determination, I think. Mm-hmm. Everybody thinks they can write, but deep in your heart, if you're a good writer, you know that.
Yeah.
And this may sound a little silly, but people say to me all the time, gee, I would love to see my name on the cover of a book like that. And I'll say, well, what have you written? Well, nothing. Well, I promise you, the publisher's not going to come beating your door down saying, please write a book for me.
No.
You got to write it. It's got to be good. And then you have to have the determination to get it done. Mm-hmm. It's a lonely business. Yeah. Nobody can help you. And you're wasting your time. I sit there with a contract in my pocket and I know I'm wasting my time. I'll never get this published. And so it takes the drive to get through it. And then you got to be thick-skinned enough that when the publisher says, no, nobody's interested in that, you say, well, you know what, you're wrong about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask you a tough question. I may not be an answer to, but to write a book like this, is it time-consuming, or is it something that you could, when you're sitting down, it all pours out?
Well, just for me, I couldn't answer that for anybody else. The research is what's time-consuming. Yeah. In every case of every one of my books, I've spent about a year on the research. Mm. Once I get that done, I write easily and well. I write it in 6 weeks.
Yeah. All right. Well, again, I mentioned the book on the assassination of Governor Goebbels. Now, you're redoing that particular book, and I think it's going to be coming out here very soon.
Yes, indeed it is. And thank you for mentioning that. My publisher, it's been out of print for 18 years. My publisher said that's much too valuable a piece of history to just let it go. Mm-hmm. You're a better writer now than you were 20 years ago. Why don't you redo that? And in the process of rewriting it, I discovered he's right. I am a much better writer. But my research skills and my research tools are so much better than they were. Yeah. The book will be out in about 3 weeks, and I will be appearing at the Nelson County Public Library on the afternoon of December 3rd, which is this Saturday. Mm-hmm. That'll introduce the book in Nelson County and answer any questions anybody has about that book or research or being an author or whatever else you want to talk about.
Yeah, I know you don't want to give any sneak previews about it, but I do want to give a little story about it. And basically, I think you told me earlier about Tom Isaac was talking to someone and told him a little bit about your book. Tell me that story again.
Well, the assassination at the State House, the killing of William Goebel, is the quintessential story of Kentucky politics.
Uh-huh.
It is the reason that the Democrats and the Republicans in this state hate each other so much as they do. And if you don't know that story, then you don't understand Kentucky politics. So the story was that a man came to Bardstown, and Tom Isaacs did not know me, but he had read that book. And the out-of-towner said, I don't understand Kentucky politics. How can I learn about it? Tom said he loaned him his copy of my book and said, here, read this and you'll know about Kentucky politics.
Well, obviously you've won awards, you've made a lot of sales. What makes you know that you're a good writer?
Trying not to sound egotistical, I've always known that, even when I was in high school. Mm-hmm. When I was in high school, I knew I would write a book someday, but you have to earn a living somehow.
Yeah.
So when I stumbled across, as I was saying, my dad's uncle's part in this assassination of William Goebel, it's an incredible story, and I thought the world has got to know about this. I've got to write it.
So you feel like you pretty much got a bust to get a story out sometime. You won't stay in any longer.
One of my literary heroes wrote a writing handbook, and one of the comments he made was all good books are written in a fever. Mm-hmm. If you don't have the fever, you're not going to write a good book.
You got very many more left in you, or is it one day at a time?
A story will come along and grab me.
Uh-huh.
You know, that's what happens every time. I read a lot, and you know, I read something, and I think, hey, it's interesting. Let me see if I can learn a little more.
That story
about
needs
that.
to be told.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, that's the fascinating thing with me, is because you run across a tidbit, and you'll think, you know, there's a little story there. You know, you read about Tecumseh, the Indian. Most people don't know about Tecumseh. You read about somebody else in history that just did something fantastic, but nobody knows that much about it.
Or Franklin Salsley or Philip Arnold.
Franklin Salsley, there's no way most people would ever think to write that.
Yeah.
I mean, he would just fade away into the dark abyss of history and nobody'd ever hear their name again.
Well, and again, that brings us full circle. I'll say again, it just blows me away to know that Franklin Salsley's story will be on the shelf as long as the Commonwealth of Kentucky exists.
And Ron Elliott's words will be too. All right. Well, Ron, I do appreciate you stopping by here today. And again, after you get your book out, maybe we'll come back in and talk a little bit more about that and some other things as well. So, and you live right here in Bardstown. That's a beautiful thing. And most people don't know what kind of treasures we've got here. And I got to say, Ron's an exceptional, if he won't say it, I'll say it, an exceptional author and an exceptional speaker as well. So if you're looking for somebody to speak at one of your organizations or school, club, or whatever you got, and learn a little bit more about this, and this is a fascinating career to be in, is the career of words, as again, posterity's forever. So give Ron a call and check him out. So Ron, appreciate you being here today, and keep on writing.
Well, thank you, Kenny. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, well, thank you very much. Ron Elliott, local author here in Bardstown. Stick around, a lot more to come here on Community Focus, and we'll be right back right after this.